Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I had been working at this company for about a year when they brought in a new boss to run my department. From day one, the guy just gave me bad vibes. He walked around with his nose in the air, acting like he owned the place. Miguel was his name. Real stereotypical corporate suit type. Slicked back hair, fancy cufflinks, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, Miguel comes waltzing in, and the first thing he does is reorganize the department, which was code for firing half my coworkers and dumping their workload on the rest of us who were left. As you can imagine, morale took a nosedive real quick. But whenever anyone complained, Miguel would just sneer and say, "We should be grateful to even have jobs." Things went steadily downhill over the next few months. Miguel kept piling more and more work on us while refusing to hire replacements for the people he'd laid off. My days stretched to 12 plus hours just to keep up, and of course our pay remained the same. Every time I asked Miguel about getting overtime or a raise to compensate, he'd get this nasty grin and say, "Be patient, it'll come." But it never did. The real kicker came at the end of the quarter when we were supposed to get our bonuses. I was exhausted and beyond frustrated with the situation, but I tried to stay positive and hope the bonus would make up for the non-stop work. The day comes, and I see Miguel gathering the team, bragging about how profitable we've been under his leadership. Then he announces bonuses have been canceled until further notice. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I told Miguel flat out it was unacceptable to keep piling more work on us while cutting our benefits, especially since it was clear the department was thriving, based on the numbers he'd just shared. He got that nasty grin again and said if I didn't like it, I could quit. But good luck finding another job when he'd give me a bad reference. That was the last straw. I decided right then and there I was done with this place. I stayed late that night, gathering evidence of all the shady stuff Miguel had pulled. Copies of emails, time cards, recordings of his threats to ruin people's reputations. I wanted to make sure I had solid proof before I made my next move. The following morning, I walked straight into Miguel's office and asked for the overtime pay I was owed. Of course, he laughed in my face and said I was lucky to even have a job after my little outburst yesterday. Then he told me again that if I didn't like it, I should sue him. I said, "You know what, Miguel? I think I will." His smug expression faltered for a split second before the sneer returned. He clearly thought I was bluffing, but I wasn't. I walked straight to HR with all the evidence I'd gathered of Miguel violating labor laws. The lady I spoke to looked horrified as she went through it all. She agreed Miguel's actions had been unethical and potentially illegal. She promised a full investigation and told me not to worry about retaliation. I knew my job was safe. HR had my back on this one. Next stop was a lawyer's office. I laid out the whole mess with Miguel and showed the lawyer all the proof. He agreed I had an excellent case for lost wages. We filed suit right away. Miguel was livid when he received the court summons at work the next day. He came storming out of his office, face red, screaming that he'd find a way to get me fired. I just waived the paperwork from HR protecting me from retaliation. Over the next few weeks, I kept reporting to work while the lawsuit moved forward. Miguel avoided me as much as possible, probably on advice from his own lawyer. Whenever we did cross paths, his expression was murderous. I'd just give a cheerful little wave and watch him storm off in the other direction. When the court date finally arrived, Miguel's lawyer tried every trick imaginable to get the case dismissed, but the judge wasn't having it. The evidence I presented was solid as a rock. In the end, I was awarded all the back pay Miguel had withheld, plus additional damages for emotional distress. Miguel thought he could get away with exploiting his employees just because he was the boss. He found out the hard way that I wasn't going to be pushed around so easily. As I walked out of court with a satisfying check stashed in my pocket, I turned and gave Miguel one last little wave. His face was beet red and contorted with rage, but he held his tongue. He had no choice but to accept defeat. In the aftermath, HR did a major overhaul of Miguel's department. Most of his policies got scrapped and they brought in people to fill the vacant roles. A few weeks later, I heard Miguel got demoted for his questionable management strategies. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I decided not to stick around, though. After all the stress Miguel put me through, I needed a fresh start somewhere new. With the settlement money padding my savings account, I had some breathing room to find a better job with people who deserved my talents. The whole experience taught me not to let arrogant jerks walk all over me, especially powerful ones who think they're untouchable. I stood up for myself and came out on top. And I'm proud to have helped put Miguel in his place. He deeply regrets telling me to sue him now. Guess he learned the hard way not to underestimate his employees and treat people fairly, or it'll come back to bite him. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When my cousin Danny was 19, she got her first real job working in the warehouse of a small manufacturing company. She was excited to finally have a steady paycheck, but her excitement quickly faded once she met Barbara, one of the senior warehouse workers. From Danny's first day, Barbara gave her a hard time, criticizing her work, talking down to her, and acting like Danny was an idiot who couldn't do anything right. Danny was a sensitive soul who hated conflict, so at first she just kept her head down and tried to avoid Barbara as much as possible. But Barbara went out of her way to belittle Danny in front of the other workers, mocking her inexperience and making snide comments about how she was just a dumb kid. Danny dreaded going into work every day, but she needed the job, so she did her best to endure Barbara's bullying. This went on for several miserable weeks until my Aunt Sue, Danny's mom's sister, applied for an open warehouse position at the same company. Aunt Sue had decades of experience in warehouse work and operations management. Danny was thrilled. Finally, there would be someone on her side to put Barbara in her place. And that's exactly what Aunt Sue did. Right from the start, she made it clear she didn't tolerate bullying. When Barbara made a condescending remark to Danny on Sue's first day, Sue immediately intervened, saying loudly, "That was uncalled for. Danny's doing fine." Barbara looked taken aback that someone had the nerve to challenge her. Sue made a point to mentor and encourage Danny, teaching her inventory management techniques and workflow optimization. Danny's confidence grew, and with Sue's support, she really hit her stride. Of course, this didn't sit well with Barbara, who seemed to feel threatened by their competence. She started digging for reasons to criticize them, but she couldn't find anything. Sue was incredibly efficient and skilled, quickly completing her own tasks, then offering to take on Barbara's overflow workload. Barbara resented this, but had no grounds to refuse the help. Slowly, it became apparent to everyone that while Sue and Danny were star warehouse workers, Barbara did the bare minimum required. Sue simply smiled and continued working hard, leading by example. Danny felt herself standing taller and speaking up more, now that Aunt Sue had her back. After a few months, there were rumblings that layoffs were coming. One day, the warehouse manager took Barbara aside, and she left looking upset. The next day, there was an announcement that Barbara's position had been eliminated due to changing business needs. Danny could hardly believe the bully who had tormented her was finally gone. Aunt Sue gave Danny a big hug and said, "Now the poison is gone. I know you'll continue to grow and shine." From that point on, Aunt Sue became like a second mother to Danny. Sue taught her everything she knew about warehouse operations and how to handle difficult personalities. 15 years later, Danny is now the warehouse manager at a much larger company, confidently managing a team of 30. She says she owes much of her success to Aunt Sue's mentorship and support. As for Barbara, I heard through the grapevine that she struggled to find steady work after the layoff. She worked a string of retail jobs, but apparently her nasty attitude kept getting her fired. Eventually she got married, but her husband divorced her after a few years. Now, in her 50s, unemployed and broke, she moved back in with her elderly parents. A few months ago, Aunt Sue told me Barbara had reached out asking if she could get a birthday cake at cost from Sue's thriving custom cake bakery. Sue agreed, taking pity on Barbara's sad situation, but she made sure to have Danny deliver the cake. Danny said Barbara wouldn't look her in the eye, just mumbled thanks and closed the door. Danny and Aunt Sue just smiled, feeling they'd come full circle. The bully had gotten her due, while the rookie and the mentor had risen. They were both grateful to have each other, and I was grateful to have them in our family. The next one is a petty revenge story. Landlady, boarding me and another lady, tells me that her brother and sister-in-law are temporarily moving in for a week or two. The landlady's brother keeps taking up my parking spot. A week later, the landlady's brother and sister-in-law are moving their entire house into this one. The landlady has her own separate third-floor loft, so I rarely see or hear her. Fast forward when routines settle. They are repeatedly disrespectful, taking others' food. Everyone except the sister-in-law works, and she expects people to entertain her. She would purposely stack boxes, blocking the basement or creating some gauntlet of haphazardness. She even blocks the basement, which is my room, using herself until she gets attention. The landlady's sister-in-law cleans the house. She often flicks the basement light off from upstairs, clucking to herself in amusement. The thing that set me off, my normal routine is work, workout, shower, chill. And I was finding more and more that the sister-in-law would spend days cleaning the bathroom in parts, and started doing it exactly when I would come home from my workout, telling me I have to wait. Often leaving the bathroom to dry or taking the shower curtain and knotting them up or washing them. Okay, fine. Routines clash, but I ask if there's a different time that could be done. Nope. Cool. This goes on for 2 weeks until one day I get home. I had worked on my day off and my workout was extra that day. I get home around 4 p.m. The contents of the entire bathroom are now outside the bathroom. The sister-in-law is watching TV. I ask when she will be finished, her shirt visible with boob and pit sweat. After this, she motioned to the TV. Okay. I come up an hour later, too. She's eating dinner at hour 3. And by hour 4, I now have to go to bed, showerless. Gross. I see the light outside my room go off around 9:30 p.m., and more clucking. Then I hear the shower. Cell flashlight on. I walk 30 feet to the laundry room sink and crank the hot water for 30 seconds and hear the shower turn off. I walk into my room and sit quietly in the dark. And I can now clearly hear the landlady's sister-in-law tell her husband to go down to the first floor to watch and listen to the basement. A few minutes pass and I hear the water again. I quietly slip out of my room, and since I know what I am going for, I don't bother with the light. I get to the hot water tank and shut the main valve after the tank off. I quietly slip back into my room and hear the landlady's sister-in-law give it good to her husband, who swears he heard absolutely nothing. She marches downstairs and I can hear her against my door. I quietly wait, and after 10 minutes she leaves to give her husband heck. He asks her to show him the problem. So I slip back out and turn the valve back on before they reach the shower. She didn't try to have another shower, and 10 minutes later I get mine. All the issues in the house suddenly resolved. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A few years ago, while I was in school and job hunting, I got an interview at a company for office work. Filing, answering phones, setting appointments, etc. I was looking forward to getting an office job instead of retail or fast food. The building had big window walls that overlooked the parking lot so you could see cars pulling in and parking. I pull into the lot and park my car. I get out and walk into the office. Now as I'm walking in, I note that there is a car parked in the handicap space in the front of the office. This car looks just like mine, I should note. So I walk in, and I'm greeted by the manager, who kind of gives me a scowling look. It made me uneasy a little as we walked back to his office. We sit down and he is asking me questions in a bit of a clipped tone. He seems annoyed by my answers, and I don't understand what's going on at this point. Finally, he says, "Do you always park in handicapped spaces?" I'm confused, so I ask him what he means. He goes on a rant about how entitled I am for parking in the handicap spot at a potential place of employment, and I'm just getting more lost. I asked him what is going on because I didn't park in the handicap spot. I'm parked in the lot. He argues with me and says he watched my car pull in and saw me park there. I again told him that I didn't park in a handicap spot, but the car that I walked by in that spot looked similar to my car. He says that he knows that he saw me park and get out of the car. At this point, I'm over the whole interview. I knew this would be a clusterfuck of a place to work for if this is the guy managing it. Then he goes a step further and says, "Prove it." I grab my purse and get my keys out. I don't even bother waiting for him and just leave the office. He's jogging after me and hurried outside to stand and wait. His face went from smug arrogance to Pikachu real quick as I walked past the car in the handicap spot. He asked me where I was going as I walked over to my car. Then I turned around and made eye contact as I hit the button on my keys to unlock it and got in. He was starting to walk over to me, calling out that he was sorry about the misunderstanding, but I just put the car in reverse and left. I didn't even make eye contact with him as I drove away. The next one is an entitled people story. When my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, she opted for no treatment. She had watched her husband go through chemo, radiation, and surgery, and he was miserable the whole time. She didn't want that for herself. Her family supported her. Over the next year, she gifted items to family and friends, told us to write our names on the things we want, take what we wanted, etc. There were conditions. No, you can't have that. It's a family heirloom meant to go to Aunt and her kids, or to Dad and his kids. We all knew what those items were and who they were going to, so that was easily settled after she died. The house was inherited by my father, who very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away 2 weeks later. I inherited the house at that point. The next-door neighbor, we'll call him Todd, came over several times, upset that he and his kids, 21F, 19M, weren't invited to Grandma's funeral. There wasn't one, we were all too busy reeling from my father's death. Weren't presented with a copy of the will. It only included family members. And he knew Grandma loved his kids like her own. She didn't. She complained about them coming over all the time, stealing her water to fill their pool, and she had to tell them to stop calling her Grandma. He wanted to know if I would allow his kids to go through the house to see if there was anything they'd like to take to remember her by. Okay, first, dude, my grandma died 4 weeks ago. And dude, my dad died 2 weeks ago. I thought he was awfully rude, but I offered to let them go through the boxes I'd packed that I was planning to donate, and he was offended. I mean, mortified. He said his daughter and son had their hearts set on some items that were family heirlooms, and I literally laughed at him. I explained they were family heirlooms and would be staying with me, and 2 of the items had already gone home with my brother. He said, my kids were her family and she would have gifted those to them. They should have been included along with everyone else when everything was divided up. Keep in mind that none of us knew this guy or his kids other than the neighbors next door. They were never at any family gatherings that were held at her house, and the only time I ever heard her talk about them was when she was complaining about them, especially when she caught them using both her hoses to fill up their pool and then came over complaining because she had put locks on the outdoor faucets. Luckily, Todd's house was in foreclosure and he moved away about a year later. I have more stories, but those will come later. The next one is an entitled Parents Story. This story happened several years ago after I first became an assistant instructor at the martial arts school I train at. We share our building with several other small martial arts schools and disciplines, so pretty much everyone is tight and knows each other. A few days beforehand, a student from the karate class had asked to join the class that I'm a part of, which is for jujitsu, which is a grappling-based martial art for the uninitiated. His mom drops him off for his first day of class, and about 20 minutes later, entitled Dad shows up. He just sits down and watches the class as I teach basic groundwork, which included some basic attacks and reversals from the guard position. The entire time, his son is looking extremely uncomfortable, though I don't know why. After about an hour, the class is over and I dismiss everyone and go to greet some of the parents, see kids off, and get ready for the next class. I'm passing by the entitled Dad when he pulls me aside to talk in private. Entitled Dad, my son ain't no homophobic slur. I take a second, being taken off guard by his tone as well as smelling the alcohol on his breath. Me? Did somebody call him that in class? Entitled Dad, no, I'm just not paying you to teach him this homophobic slur crap. I'm bringing him here so he can know how to kick some ass. He says, raising his voice. He also gives me a punch on the shoulder as if to emphasize his point. Me, sir, please keep your voice down. Entitled Dad, he doesn't need to know how to lay on his back and spread his legs like some pussy, he says, raising his voice even louder. Me, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to please leave. Entitled Dad, duck you. I ain't bringing him for you to get your rocks off and try to convert him, you homophobic slur, African-American slur. Parents and students are now fully tuned in to what's going on. His son comes over and tries to pull him away, but he ignores him. Me, sir, entitled Dad, you want to settle this right now? I got my friends Smith and Wesson out in the truck. They can help us solve this and give you some medicine. He starts moving to the door and I move and block the door. Me, sit down. I'm doing my best to sound intimidating, but in reality, I'm crapping bricks. I'm confident in my skills, but this guy has like 40 pounds on me, and no martial artist wants to be put in a situation like this. All I know is I'm not letting this guy who just threatened me anywhere near his car. He takes a swing at me and I end up tackling him to the ground. I put him in a chokehold, applying pressure each time he tries to move or get out. I stay on top of him for what feels like forever for the police to show up. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.